to the brain, more or less.
Ah.
Because if I had this additional structure, of course, I have an additional coupled oscillator, and then the chance of my voice source becoming unstable, irregular, or chaotic is much greater. And of course, if I speak like this completely takes you away from the meaning of what I'm saying. So in speech, I need a very simple carrier signal to encode the information in another way. On the other hand, if I'm not a human, but if I'm an animal, I typically don't have speech and I don't have language and syntax. So I have to encode everything that I want to do, or most of it, in the voice source. So if I want to show aggression, for instance, I go "Whoa" instead of "whoa." It's a very, very basic and down-to-earth concept. So that's the story from last year, and now we are working on a study where we show in a couple of New World monkeys how they use this membrane to actually create complexity in the voice, in the vocalizations. And I can kind of give a sneak preview. This is about registers and yodeling monkeys, actually.
Like the one you've been working on the whales.
Yeah, but on the whales, that was just a comment. I didn't do any. I was once in the lab with the baleen whales. Yes, but that is a paper by other people.
Wonderful. So since we're here talking about animals and animal vocalizations, and you mentioned monkeys and whales now, what are the most curious voices you have studied, and what parallels can you draw with the human voice? For example, would you say that this knowledge you've been acquiring now from these studies may be applied to human voice?
Yeah, I think on many levels. To me, it's really fascinating. So if you think of the general function of the larynx, we humans are really not so special when it comes to voice. Okay, yes, we lost those membranes, but then most of the mammals don't have them to begin with, so it's just a thing in the non-human primates. So the comparative anatomy of the larynx is fundamentally similar from, I would say, very, very small bats weighing a couple of grams to elephants. Yes, the whales are different, of course, and a couple of other exceptions. But one thing that I think voice science and bioacoustic voice science particularly has brought to light in the last 10 years is really fascinating, is that the same physical mechanism of creating sound has evolved throughout the mammalian kingdom, and even in birds, in different organs. So I'm talking about the myoelastic aerodynamic theory, which helps us to convert, and of course you know this, but I'm going to say it.
Yeah, please explain to our listeners. Yes, we want you to explain the myoelastic theory of voice production.
I'm not going to go into details here because this is not a science lecture, but
No.
it's a question: how do you create acoustic energy? And with the myoelastic aerodynamic principle, you use the exhalatory airstream and convert the power that is embedded in this moving air into sound. And the efficiency, of course, of energy conversion is very, very low, but nevertheless, it's enough because human or any hearing is extremely sensitive. So that's how we do it. Basically, take the respiratory apparatus and have the vocal folds vibrate, and then we have changes interruptions in the transglottal flow, and those interruptions set up pressure gradients, and changes in pressure, audible changes in pressure are sound, basically. And of course, and you would go, duh, but there is other ways of creating sound. So we could, if we were crickets, we'd be doing this, and create sounds, a sound like this, for instance. Or if we were a fish, we would contract our swim bladders and create sound like this. So the animal kingdom has come up with a couple of really interesting solutions. Now, the cool thing about the aerodynamic theory is well, in humans and most mammals, we create this in the larynx. In the dolphins, they do have the same principle, but they create it in the nose. The birds, they create this in the syrinx, so it's the first bifurcation of the trachea. Yes, and then if you think of brass players, they do the same thing with their lips. And interestingly, if we talk about replacement organs in humans, when somebody unfortunately had to have a laryngectomy, it's the same principle. You just add a replacement organ, it's basically flapping in the wind and creating sound like this. So this is cool. This is one thing, and then of course this makes us understand that bioacoustics is slowly getting there now, is that there are different parameters or metrics in the voice other than intensity and fundamental frequency. This is a very new thing, and I think people haven't really picked it up. But you could create vocal registers, and if you look, you see them also in animals. I'm sure that the degree of vocal fold adduction, for instance, which is super important in singing, it might have an influence in animal vocalizations. So these things, so basically the physiological control of what we can do in the larynx is also similar across the most animals. And the third thing to answer the question is, and this is anecdotal even, but I can say I've worked a lot with excised larynges in the lab. So what does it mean is you take a larynx from a deceased animal, and at this point I have to say I do not kill animals, and I do not have animals killed for scientific purposes. This is very important. So, but whenever an animal is freshly deceased and we have access to it, then we are very thankful that we can work with this and study this, because this is otherwise not possible, because you cannot just stick an endoscope into the mouth of an animal and say, please go sing a messa di voce. That doesn't.
A tiger, for example.
Yes, yeah.
Not easy with humans.
Yeah. And if you're lucky, then only your 2,000 euro endoscope or 3,000 euro endoscope is gone. And if you're unlucky, then much more. So that doesn't work. So we have to study this in vitro under controlled conditions. And I had this revelation. This is really personal, but it was so interesting. I had a red deer larynx on the bench, and I was manipulating the sound and changing adduction, vocal fold length, and anything. And all of a sudden, in a red deer that is has a fundamental frequency of vocalization at, I would say, yeah, in the range of a baritone or a bass, and of course they can go high also, but not that high, in the hundreds of hertz. All of a sudden, I got a whistle register or something that sounds like M3 in a high-pitched soprano singing, just by creating biomechanical boundary conditions that support this mechanism. And this made me realize that actually it's the same when you teach somebody to sing. And yes, of course, there is a whole human attached to the larynx, and it's very, very important to consider this. But essentially, if you talk about the sound production phenomenon itself, it is about creating the biomechanical properties by all sorts of tricks, of course. And you never tell the student about the Young's modulus or whatnot, of course, that would be crazy. But this insight that it's the same, that was really helpful.
So just a quick question talking about that, and we have that in the script, this question, and I'm going forward, but then Mauro, please come back to the script. So you were saying that there is more than fundamental frequency and intensity, and then you start to talk about registers. So, and then manipulation of biomechanics in the larynx. So were you referring to timbre? And what is the most, no, I wouldn't say the most, but what are the contributions of the vocal tract, the head again, put together with the larynx? What are the contributions of that to those sounds, those manipulation of the sounds, and getting different timbres from the biomechanics of the larynx? Is it too? Do you see registers as a pure physical biomechanics of the larynx, or there is also something to deal with the vocal tract in those models that you study with also animals?
It's an interesting question. Are you asking, to clarify, are you asking about humans or are you asking about
Both,
mammals?
both. Yeah, both, if you may, if it's not too much.
Let's talk about mammals first. It's easier. We don't know. There is simply too few data. So there are some suggestions that animals do use resonance tuning as a systematic thing. But I think we need more. We need much more evidence. So, because in animals, you know how hard it is to study, to measure real resonances. I'm not talking about formants, but I'm talking about resonances. They are a different thing, particularly in high-pitched singing. How hard it is to measure resonances in humans even, where the humans comply and really want to help you in the laboratory setting and everything. It's next to impossible to measure this in vivo in an animal. So this is very hard to study, and also the concept of resonance tuning has not permeated the bioacoustics scientific world yet. So that's to come in the next decades, I think. In humans, yes, of course. I mean, there is a thing that is called the source filter theory. People know about it, or should know about it, I think. There is a linear version and a non-linear version. And even if we consider the linear version, so which goes back to Chiba and Kajiyama and even earlier, it goes even back to Helmholtz in its roots. The timbre, okay, we have to be careful here. The timbre is a psychoacoustic term. It's what we perceive. It's very, very hard to measure. Let's not talk about the timbre. Let's talk about the spectral composition. And we know, of course, in many, many discussions, these terms are mixed up and intermingled, but we have to be clear. It's the spectral composition. And the spectral composition is a product of the spectral composition of the sound source, so what is happening in the larynx, and what is happening in the vocal tract. So in my opinion at least, anyone who says that the spectral composition of the sound, and hence the vowel color or the voice color, and hence registration events in the further term, is only determined by either one of these two components exclusively, I think is wrong. Misses the big picture. You have to consider that it could always be either that or the other, which means either the voice source or the vocal tract. And for instance, and I know this is an ongoing debate, and this is very to the point actually what is currently happening. So I've discussed one example from Don Miller's book in my Journal of Singing articles, I think from 2 years ago or something, where you can, if you listen to so a mezzo-soprano is singing an ascending scale from G3 to G4. So we're talking about 200 to 400 hertz fundamental frequency. And if you listen to this example, you can hear two transitions. And then looking at the spectrogram, you can see that at the higher of these two transitions, it doesn't matter whether it's the higher or the lower one, it's just a conceptual thing. I think it was the third harmonic that increases suddenly by 20 dB or something, which means that at this point, most likely the second vocal tract resonance has hit the third harmonic or the other way around, which boosts this. So this is not a laryngeal event particularly, because the EGG waveform stays rock solid. There is no change there. So it's most likely determined entirely by the vocal tract. And then there is this other event. You look at the EGG waveform and there is an abrupt change there. So it's very clear this has to be laryngeal, which just shows you, okay, both is possible. So if you hear something, and anecdotally, I've done this at a couple of conferences with hundreds of people. I tested this. So we're talking about conferences with full room full of singing teachers, experienced singing teachers and speech language pathologists. So they know what they're doing. They're experts. And you play this sound back to them and you ask, please raise your hand where you hear the transition. And you have about 50% of the people raising their hand at one point and 50% raising their hand at the other point. So, which means the concept of a register transition, if you look at it perceptually, you have to consider the effect of both the voice source and the vocal tract. If you go ahead and you say, okay, I follow Garcia and there is only laryngeal transitions, okay, then you only look at what is happening mechanically at the larynx. And if you say, I only subscribe to what is happening in the vocal tract, okay, then you miss anything that is happening in the larynx.
Yeah, I guess the interesting point is that you mentioned the timbra is a perceptual parameter. So if we talk about registers, we're talking about perception, and perception could be affected by many different things.
Yes, and I think the whole point here, or the most important point here is you have to be clear on which level you are considering the phenomenon. If you talk about this perceptually, you have to understand that there is an additional layer of an additional filter or in there. You cannot go from the spectrum to the timbre one-on-one, and then there is a
yes, also timbre involves expectations of your cultural background and what you are used to hear and all that. So it's a much more complex.
And even loudness.
Yeah.
It's been studied by hundreds, if not thousands of people over many decades now. So you cannot just throw this away and say, okay, spectral composition equals timbre. But may I go back to one very, very important thing here, and we've shown this in a recent paper with Brad Story and David Maya and me in the Journal of Singing, where we talk about resonance tuning strategies in belt. And there is, in the introduction, there is one figure that shows or that asks what is the dominant harmonic, because that's a thing that people start to look at in the singing voice research world these days. So that's important. And with a very simple source filter simulation, we could show that the dominant, and this is keeping a constant filter setting in the vocal tract. So you don't change anything in the filter. If the conditions are right, you change the spectral slope of the voice source and you get completely different dominant harmonics just by changing the spectral slope of the voice source. So people who say that the dominant harmonic must be indicative of the resonance tuning alone, they miss a point here. They miss the contribution of what is happening in the voice source.
Interesting. Also interesting, Mauro, is tell us.
Yeah. Since you're talking, we came back to the human voice, especially in singing, and we're talking about these very up-to-date topics. What findings on your findings you consider most important for understanding and even practicing singing?
Oh, what findings and I should say the most important insight is that the human voice, or any voice, but particularly now we talk about singing voice, that voice production is much more complex than we would like to believe. It's a real problem, because when I have my voice pedagogue hat on in the studio, I need simple concepts, I need simple solutions, I need best practices, I need a recipe, do this, and then the voice should be better. And either I just simply follow a recipe. So let's take the image of medicine here, or let's talk about medicine, very simplified. When somebody has a problem, she or he goes to a doctor, then there is an examination where you get information about the phenomenon, and then there is a diagnosis happening based on the information about the examination and based on the models that the doctor has learned in their formative period in the teaching. So you need both. You need the understanding of general principles of how the organism works, and you need the information, how does the patient present themselves. Based on this, you arrive at the diagnosis, which is the crossroads, or is the fulcrum, the most important point. Based on the diagnosis, there is a suggestion for therapy. So it's a prescription. And interestingly, both the diagnosis and the prescription, only the head MD, medical doctor, can do this. And then there is the therapy itself. So you have the recipe, do this, then there is the therapy, and then there is another examination, and then either it's a loop, you go back to the system, or you
improve and get better, and you don't need to go back.
or you change the doctor, or you run out of money, or even worse things. So it's different.
Let's be positive.
Yes.
People get better.
So, and if I apply this model to voice pedagogy, and of course you could argue, can we even do this or not, because it's an art, and I would never apply this to the art of singing, to this aspect. I'm exclusively talking about voice building, because then we can deal with an organism and we can try to understand how voice production is happening. So yeah, what is the status, the examination? It's done perceptually, which is fine, because the end product is also a perceptual outcome, because people are listening to what we sing. So we mustn't just hide in the physical realm. I think it's completely fine to go to stay in perceptual terms, but understand that perception doesn't equal physical reality, and vice versa. And for instance, if you measure something with like a voice range profile, this is physical. You measure intensity, you don't measure loudness, and we know that, for instance, these could be different things. Okay, and then there is models based on a couple of decades of really nice and serious voice science done by many good people. You arrive at a diagnosis. For instance, you say there is too much adduction, or vertical larynx position is too high, or whatnot. And then you think of, how can I change this? And then you think of, how can I change this in the student without telling the student about concepts like LCA muscles or whatnot, because that's not helping really in the singing. And then you follow the recipe once you have decided what you want to do. I would advocate that you don't skip the steps of doing the proper examination, and even if it's only perceptual and acoustic, and the diagnosis and the prescription. So I advocate that people have a choice in what they do with different people, because the people are different. And
I'll be back. You continue. I will be back. There's someone.
So there is no one model that fits anyone, that fits everyone. I think in my book that doesn't work. It's not how the voice works. So this is the most important insight, actually. Voice production is complex, and I'm still trying to, I've said this in order to be able to answer the question even. So recently I sat down with Jan Schwetz and we asked ourselves a very, very simple question, which is, what are the basic features of sound output in the singing voice? And yes, there is vowel color determined by the resonances. There is fundamental frequency. There is even the question: is the voice source periodic or not? There is noise components. There is sound intensity, and there is a degree of strength of overtones, so spectral composition, yeah, mostly of the voice source. And then we ask, okay, so these 6 features in the radiated sound, what are the subsystems in the voice production apparatus that can influence these? And the most straightforward answer would be yes, vowel color is determined by the vocal tract, and sound intensity is mostly determined by the pulmonary apparatus, so mostly in terms of subglottal pressure, even though that's not the answer that we want to hear as singing teachers, maybe. And everything else is mostly determined by the larynx. But if you look deeper, you find out that any feature is influenced by each of the 3 subsystems. So you have 6 features in the sound and 3 subsystems, which gives you 18 different control paths. And I think this is horrifying from a teaching point of view. It's a horrifying insight, because what I do as a singing teacher is I would like to change the sound, but I cannot change the sound directly. Mm-hmm. I can only try to suggest changes in muscular control patterns in the singer by, of course, translating this. I never talk about the muscle control patterns directly, but that's what I can influence, actually, how the singer behaves in terms of their internal movement in the body during the singing and before the singing.
It's kind of like sports medicine, isn't it? Like an athlete, when it runs or jumps, or there are many systems involved, and you get the athlete to do what is more optimized for the athlete by training specific exercises. So that is the goal of a teacher of singing, or even a voice speech pathologist. I think we do work in the same field, transforming perception into neuromuscular behavior. So would you agree that it's more effective to have a kind of reaction in the student and modification of the behavior through specific exercises that put all this complexity together and work in a certain way?
Yes. In principle, yes, with a few reservations or caveats. So first thing is, of course, if you mentioned sports medicine, if I wanted to become a football coach, I would go to my team and I would tell them, hey, you have to score more goals and you have to concede fewer goals. That's how you win. But this is not very helpful, because it's completely output related. It's not changing anything in how the athletes behave. And as you say, it's precisely the same. You said specific exercises. Yes. Caveat number 1, ideally, please understand why you're doing which exercise. Because again, could be too much adduction, could be too few adduction, could be a wrong vowel placement because we're not hitting a certain harmonic with a certain resonance or whatnot. So it's not about, when we talk about a holistic picture, it's not about indiscriminate use of exercises. It's really informed.
Yeah, I think we are in a path of some enlightenment into what type of exercises could work for some things, not for all the things, and specifically, as you said, so right, artistry. That is not what we are talking. We are talking about voice building. But from scientific research, and also from research from speech and language pathology and how to prevent pathologies and optimize voice production and all that, that certain kind of exercises have a result in certain balance between breathing, oscillation and resonance. So, but I loved what you said. Is not about the output that is more important, is the process to achieve that output. And I would also like to comment that in the sense that do you believe that voice teachers should have also hearing education towards voice production? What is more healthy? What is less healthy? How to relate a certain kind of acoustic outputs with the production of the system? Because, for example, from my background, we don't have very much, when we become teachers of singing, preparation of our hearing. We know lots of anatomy, we can know a lot of acoustics and all that, but then when it comes to building up perceptual hearing of voices is more complex. So do you think we are lacking on that as well in the field of voice research, this connection between what you hear and what is the production of that, of what you hear?
Yeah, I can answer to that, and then I would like to come back to the previous question, because there is something important I think that needs to be conveyed. Yes, people need to I think, or it is beneficial to have the training, because if you think about this, and this is an old idea, and I saw this in a book by Dennis and Pinson from 1961 or something. It's they call it the speech chain, but it applies, of course, to singing as well. There is a thought, so it's a cognitive start, which is translated to neurally to motor control patterns, which is translated to physiological movements, which has an embodiment, if you will, in the physical world by means of aerodynamics, mechanics, acoustics. Then there is transmission, and then there is perception. And it doesn't end at the radiated sound. Most of the research we do in singing voice ends here with a microphone in front of the singers. But this, we don't sing for a speech, for a sound pressure level meter. We sing for an audience. So, of course, and this is not only, it's easy to say singing teachers need to understand this, but it also needs to be researched properly. And I think there is way to go. There is many things to cover, actually. So yes, a full yes. Going and having said this, so this is the big picture, and we would love to understand the entire big picture. And if you look at the landscape of researchers these days, and this is inevitable, this is normal. Everybody has their own portion which they picked along this, if we call it the speech chain, where they do research, and that's fine. But we must not lose sight of the big picture, because that's essentially what we need to understand. That's the holy grail of voice science. Now, having said this, let's get back to the voice production again. And you mentioned specific exercises. Is it good to have targeted exercises? Yes. I want to go back to this. And really, this still answers Mauro's question. What is the most important insight from voice science, particularly for the teaching, is how vastly complex the voice production system is. So just talking about the 3 subsystems and these 6 sound features and these 18 control paths, we can, when we, of course, we work perceptually. We hear something in the sound and we say, okay, there is too much breathiness, for instance. Okay, where do I work? This is about embodied or embodiment. Where in the body does my exercise, my input apply to? Because, okay, this is easy. Because if I have too much breathiness, most likely I wouldn't. Well, some people do, But physiology and voice production physiology, I would say, suggests otherwise. Most people would not work with the vocal tract, because we can assume, based on what we understand from sound production, breathiness happens in the larynx. It's incomplete glottal closure. So probably, unless there is an organic lesion, it needs to be looked at, of course, and ruled out. But once it's ruled out, we can assume, okay, this is too little adduction. We can there increase glottal adduction. So this is simple. But there are other situations where it is entirely unclear where in the body should, or which part of the body should our exercise target. And this is where we stand with most of the things these days. And of course, the simple way out is okay, this is my set of exercises. That's what we do. We don't consider anything else, and in 80% of the cases it works. Yeah, hey, but I don't want to be one of the 20% left out, of course, if I would receive singing teaching. So I think there is really a room to improvement. So in answer to Mauro's earlier question from feels like 2 hours ago, so forgive me for speaking so much, but this is a complex thing, is the insight that there are no simple solutions. Our knowledge in voice science and in voice production is not complete. So also our methods in teaching cannot be complete at this point. We have to be open that we have to add more insights and further understanding as it becomes available. So this is an ongoing process.
I believe that's really, really important, because as a voice teacher, it's super common to hear things that, oh, I need to increase support or things like that, that is so specific and driven to one specific point in the voice system. And like I said, sometimes we have an idea that, oh, it's breathy, we need to increase the voice production, but could be something different. And by understanding that the system is complex and super interactive, only by understanding this, without the whole knowledge that we still don't have it, by understanding this, we can maybe open our minds and see, okay, let's try something different here. Maybe it doesn't make really sense, but it could work. And I guess that's what we do sometimes.
Yeah, and it's, I think the best teacher is the one that is a reflective practitioner, always thinking, am I doing the right thing? Can I try something else? Could the problem be from somewhere else? And as more knowledge you have, as better solutions you can find. If you are just confined to one answer to all problems, then your tool, your book, your box tool is incomplete. So being a reflective practitioner is a key thing. And moving a bit from so much specific topics, let's talk about Freddie Mercury.
Less specific.
Yeah, he had a wonderful, wonderful voice, and you have a publication and a study about it. Could you tell us more about your study on Freddie Mercury's voice?
Yes, this is.
That's one of my favorites, and favorites from my students.
Mine as well. And if you look at the paper in the acknowledgements, you will see one sentence there. The first sentence in the acknowledgements is, "This is a work of fan science." Fan fiction, you know that? So I thought, okay, we need another word. This is fan science. I did this completely in my free time, which is interesting because, of course, yeah, this was all over the social media and the media. So I think an estimated 30 million people heard radio interviews of mine talking about this, because this was featured in All Things Considered, in NPR and BBC NewsHour and things like this. So And people said, yeah, and how dare they waste public resources on this kind of science? And to those people, I can say, no, I did everything in my spare time. Because when I was a kid, in my puberty, in my teens, I listened to Queen a lot. This totally influenced me, the way they made music. A couple of others as well, but Queen particularly. So how did it start? I was asked by an Austrian radio show, can I do a quick interview and a quick analysis of Freddie Mercury's voice? There was some anniversary, I think, more than 10 years ago. And yeah, let's do it. And then an Austrian author heard this interview and she asked me, can I contribute a small 3 pages voice analysis to her book? She's writing a book about Freddie Mercury. Okay, I did this. And then she wrote back, yeah, but I'm not going to write this book. So I had this work done, and then I said, okay, let's publish this. And I published this in a German-speaking logopedics journal. And then a couple of years later, I thought, okay, I talked to the editor of LPV at this point, and I asked, hey, would this be suitable in an English translation? Because it might be of interest. And yes, and I published it then. And then I talked to the editorial office, and I suggested, hey, can't we do a press release? Yeah, let's do a press release. But it took a couple of emails. In the end, I think I even wrote the press release and said, please use this. And they released this, and then it became.
What did you find that was special?
What did I find? So it was an analysis of the fundamental frequency of the speaking voice, where we found. This is not in the tenor range, but in the baritone range, which is interesting because he sings as a tenor or in the tenor range. We had a rock singer imitate his sound, and we did high-speed laryngeal endoscopy and found that there was a 3-to-1 entrainment between the vocal folds and the ventricular folds, and that created that kind of growly, rough sound. So basically, whenever the vocal folds repeated 3 revolutions, the ventricular folds repeated 1. And that kind of perceptually makes the fundamental frequency drop by an octave and a fifth if you listen closely, and if you're trained to hear that, and otherwise you just hear like a roughness. And I think the most striking feature for me was the structure of Freddie Mercury's vocal vibrato, because it is a little bit on the fast side, and it's rather irregular. So if you compare this to, and we did this in the paper, we compared it to Pavarotti's, I think, or was it Michael Schade? I forgot. So we analyzed the tenor there,
yeah,
where you have a nice sinusoidal modulation of the fundamental frequency. And if you look at Freddie Mercury's, it's irregular. And if you do a frequency analysis of the modulation contour, often you would find 2 peaks, which means that most likely there are 2 systems that act as modulators. So this is, and this is also kind of what I put in the interpretation or the discussion section. So it's a voice towards chaos or on the edge of chaos,
but not ugly.
Absolutely not, and this is purely subjective and perceptual. To me, the voice sounds even fragile. So there is a singer who dares go there, whether intentionally or not, we will never know, of course. But it's just my interpretation. Somebody who really gets out of the comfort zone a little bit, and I think many singers do this, particularly in popular music, and that makes it so endearing. They dare do something outside the box of our daily lives, and that's why it is so cool, I think.
Time for one more quick question, Mauro, and then we will have to call it a day, I think. Unfortunately, we would love to be talking with you all morning. You are so interesting, and your research is amazing. Mauro.
Yeah, okay. So I finish with a question for both of you. So, and you have publications and opinions on the importance of evidence-based voice teaching. And could you please share more with us about your opinion on this matter?
Oh,
We've been talking a bit, but it's finished the evidence-based voice pedagogy, since now it's a quite usual
well,
topic.
I can just say one thing before we talk about it, that in other fields of education, evidence-based is really a hot topic, because we believe that teaching specific contents, of course, because education is much more broader than just passing concepts, because that is not education, but speaking about mathematics, learning a language, etc., that helps to know what is being written in the literature about these, about how people learn, etc. But I will give this topic to our interviewee, Christian. What do you think? Are we in the area of jumping into evidence-based practices in voice pedagogy?
Yeah, so sorry, my internet just dropped, so I had to change the connection. It was not because I was trying to drop the question.
Escape.
Avoid the question.
Okay, so let's talk about the term evidence-based voice pedagogy. It's derived from evidence-based medicine, where we have well, and there it is highly debated. And what does it mean? It means that we have lots of evidence, and we have an evidence pyramid. And at the bottom of this pyramid, and I'm talking about evidence-based medicine first, is expert opinions and case studies. And then there is double-blinded, highly controlled studies, and at the top of the pyramid is meta-studies, based on many studies who include many, ideally hundreds, thousands, or even 10,000s of participants. So it's a high degree of evidence that is needed in medicine. And I would claim that the same level of evidence would also be needed in voice pedagogy. Unfortunately, what we have is mostly expert opinions, case studies, and studies with a very limited number of participants. And we're talking something, if you look at the journals, what do you see? N equals 6, 7. If you see a study that says N equals 15, you say, wow, that's a big study.
With singers, but yeah. But there are studies with more people, like 20s and 40s, but more related to speech pathology and
Yes.
that field. Yes.
And even if we are talking about studies with 20 or 40 participants, you show this to a statistician who works in medicine, you would get a polite smile maybe from them. And this is not the fault of the researchers in our field. It's very important to say this, because we have to understand this is different. Because it's highly invasive, we need to find the people who are willing to help and everything. And of course, there is not so much money. We are living in a niche. If you look at the funding schemes, there is not even a category for singing voice science. And
No, I think there's more money to study animal communication than human communication.
Yeah, sometimes I think that too. So, which means the evidence-based or the evidence aspect doesn't work. It's not transferable. We are not there yet. The other thing is there is one component of evidence-based medicine, which is critical appraisal, which is the possibility, the facility of practitioners to critically read and review the available literature, and to understand what is making sense and what is not making sense, and what is applicable to what I'm doing in my practice. So young doctors are, and also older or longer standing doctors are trained in this. So, and this is an aspect that I think is very feasible and very transferable to our field. And a little bit of announcement, very, very recently, I think a couple of days ago, this appeared, is an article by David Meyer and me in the Journal of Singing, where we introduced suggestions for critically appraising pedagogical literature or literature for voice pedagogy, coming up with 6 questions of how to assess this and evaluate this. So this is working, but the evidence bit, we really have to work on this. And I think there is another term which is called science-informed voice pedagogy, which most likely is much truer to the actual thing that we can do at this point. But if the question is, should or would I recommend that singing teachers learn more about the function of voice? Yes, by all means. For instance, it's a lecture I gave recently at one event, where I talk about 3 very, very important bits of information about breathing in singing that are between 50 and 150 years old. So this knowledge has been around for more than 100 years in some cases, and it has still not entered the textbooks. So this is not about the science itself. So we have to work on several fronts if you want. One is gaining more understanding, gaining more knowledge. The other is transferring this knowledge both ways. It's also an important thing. So transferring available knowledge to the practitioners. Question is, who is going to do that? It's the scientists, but it's also the teachers who can do this if they want. Nobody has to. I mean, there is this debate, why should scientists tell us how we teach? No, it's not working like this. There is knowledge that is available. If you're interested as a teacher, look into it, because it most likely, or it is potentially helpful in improving the way you teach. But the transfer goes also the other way. So if I'm a voice scientist and I want to research singing voice, it would be helpful and beneficial to really talk to singing teachers and understand what are the problems, what needs to be solved. Otherwise, okay, I can do wonderful science and I can publish nice colored graphs that look very, very important and difficult, but maybe they are not very helpful in general practice. And of course, sometimes they have to be, because science has to be rigorous. In the scientific method is we break things down. We say ceteris paribus. So we have a very simple, isolated question that we can then clearly answer. And in the pedagogy, we need a holistic system, because we're teaching with a complex human being on many levels, not only voice production, but also psychology and learning experiences and whatnot. So that's a conflict that is there. We have to acknowledge that. And it's everybody's task, if they want, if they choose to accept the mission, if you will, to resolve this and to move forward together, not against each other, but together.
Together. Oh, thank you, Christian, really, and Mauro for being here and also put so many interesting questions. And I hope you can all come to PVOC. Will be from the 4th to the 7th of September in Santander, Spain, a beautiful place where voice teachers, ENT surgeons and clinicians, speech and language pathologists, vocal coaches will be all together, as Christian said, looking forward to work together to understand more about human communication, also learning from animal models and models from humans, and also even artificial intelligence. So will be a wonderful program. And we thank you again, Christian, for your availability to be with us today. I know you are very busy, and we cannot thank you enough. And I hope who will listening to this live that will be recorded also in our channel will enjoy as much as we did your wonderful explanations and clear insights. Mauro, you want to say something before we adjourn?
Yeah, no, just thank you, Filipa. Thank you, Christian, for being here with us again. Thank you who's watching us. And see you all in Santander.
Yes, and keep follow us. We will be talking before Santander again. So
Yes.
stay attentive with our YouTube channel. See you soon.
Bye-bye. Done.